Welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are pulling back the curtain on 3 stories that the corporate media would rather you skim past. From a corruption scandal gripping Malaysia's top anti-graft enforcer, to a quiet American company building the bridge for Chinese humanoid robots to walk into your neighborhood, to Tesla's accelerating sales collapse in its own backyard. These stories are connected, and by the end of this broadcast, you'll see exactly how.
I'm Maya Clarity, and let me tell you what ties these stories together. It's a single thread: accountability. Who has it, who's dodging it, and who's profiting while the rest of us are left asking questions that nobody in power wants to answer? Tonight, we're going to answer those questions. So buckle in.
Let's start with a number. 11.4%. That's how much Tesla's sales dropped in California last year. We'll get to that. But first, let me ask you this: what happens when the person in charge of fighting corruption in an entire nation is himself accused of corruption? That's not a hypothetical. That is happening right now in Malaysia.
And while that unfolds in Southeast Asia, a small American software company is quietly making it possible for Chinese-built humanoid robots to be deployed around the world. No congressional hearings. No public debate. Just a startup in San Francisco shooting promotional videos in a park while police show up wondering what's going on. The future is arriving, and nobody asked permission.
That's what we do here at Truth Report. We ask the questions that matter. Let's get into it.
Our first story tonight takes us to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where the country's anti-corruption chief, Azam Baki, has been summoned by a special government committee to explain his stock ownership. Let that sink in. The man who leads the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, the MAC, the agency tasked with rooting out financial misconduct across the entire nation, is now under investigation for his own financial dealings.
According to reporting from the South China Morning Post, Azam Baki was called before this special committee on Thursday to explain the matter. The committee was set up specifically to probe his share ownership, and Malaysia's chief secretary to the government, Shamsul Azri Abu Bakar, confirmed in a statement that the committee is examining what he called the compliance and regularity of Azam's share ownership. They're still evaluating evidence, and they've made clear they intend to call on additional witnesses.
Now, Alex, let's give our viewers the context here, because this story did not emerge in a vacuum. Allegations about Azam Baki's stock ownership have been circulating for some time. The core question is straightforward: did the head of Malaysia's anti-corruption agency acquire shares in publicly traded companies in a manner that was consistent with the law and with the ethical standards expected of someone in his position? If not, you have a staggering conflict of interest, the fox not only guarding the henhouse but buying shares in the henhouse.
And that's the critical point. This is not about some mid-level bureaucrat with a few shares in a retirement portfolio. This is the top anti-corruption official in a country that has struggled enormously with corruption at the highest levels. Malaysians remember the 1MDB scandal, the massive sovereign wealth fund fraud that brought down a prime minister and sent shockwaves through global finance. The MAC is supposed to be the institution that prevents that from ever happening again. So when the head of that institution is himself called to explain his financial holdings, it strikes at the very foundation of public trust.
What's particularly telling is the mechanism being used here. This isn't a judicial proceeding, at least not yet. It's a special committee, convened by the government, to evaluate evidence and make findings. That structure tells you something about the political dynamics at play. The Malaysian government is trying to demonstrate responsiveness to public pressure without immediately escalating to criminal proceedings. It's a balancing act, and the question is whether it will produce genuine accountability or become a mechanism for managing the optics.
And let's be clear about why public pressure matters in this case. Malaysian civil society organizations and opposition politicians have been vocal in demanding that Azam Baki be investigated. When you have an anti-corruption chief whose own financial conduct is in question, every single investigation the MAC has conducted or is currently conducting comes under a shadow. Defense attorneys in corruption cases across the country now have ammunition to question the credibility and impartiality of the institution itself.
That's the cascading effect that makes this so dangerous. It's not just about one man's stock portfolio. It's about whether Malaysia has a functioning anti-corruption infrastructure. International organizations like Transparency International have been watching this closely because Malaysia's ranking on the Corruption Perceptions Index is directly linked to the perceived independence and effectiveness of its anti-corruption institutions. If the MAC is compromised at the top, the signal that sends to foreign investors, to international partners, and to ordinary Malaysians is devastating.
And here's what the corporate angle looks like, Maya. When you're talking about stock ownership by a senior government official, you're talking about potential insider information, potential conflicts of interest in enforcement decisions, and potential favoritism toward companies in which that official has a financial stake. The companies whose shares Ozambaki held, or is alleged to have held, those companies need to answer questions too. Did they know? Did they benefit from any preferential treatment? Were enforcement actions against competitors influenced by these holdings?
These are exactly the questions that the special committee needs to pursue. And the international community should be watching closely, because the integrity of anti-corruption institutions is not just a domestic issue. In an interconnected global economy, corruption in one country creates ripple effects across borders. Companies doing business in Malaysia, investors with exposure to Malaysian markets, trading partners who rely on transparent regulatory frameworks, they all have skin in this game.
The bottom line on this story is simple. If you can't trust the person in charge of fighting corruption, you can't trust the system. Malaysia is at a crossroads, and the outcome of this probe will tell us whether the country is serious about accountability or whether this is theater designed to let the pressure dissipate. We'll be following this one closely.
Now let's pivot to a story that sounds like it's straight out of a science fiction film but is very much happening right now. A US software company called OpenMind is positioning itself as the critical link between Chinese humanoid robot manufacturers and the global market. And the implications of this are enormous.
According to the South China Morning Post, OpenMind's founder and CEO, Jan Liffert, described what happened when his company shot a promotional video in a San Francisco park. A crowd gathered, children came running, cars stopped, and the police showed up, all because there was a humanoid robot walking around in public. Liffert made an interesting observation. He said that same scenario would have been treated completely differently on the other side of the world, specifically in China, where companies like Unitree are manufacturing humanoid robots and the public is far more accustomed to seeing them.
And that contrast is the entire story, Alex. China has been pouring resources into humanoid robotics. Companies like Unitree, with their G1 model, are producing robots that can walk, navigate complex environments, and perform tasks that were purely theoretical just a few years ago. But there's a gap between building the hardware and getting it adopted globally. That gap is software integration, and that's exactly where OpenMind is positioning itself.
Think about what this means strategically. The United States government has spent the last several years trying to restrict China's access to advanced semiconductor technology, trying to slow down China's AI development, and trying to maintain American technological superiority. And here you have a US company actively building the software infrastructure to make Chinese robots deployable worldwide. The irony is staggering.
But let's be fair about the complexity here. OpenMind is doing something that the market clearly demands. Humanoid robots are coming whether we like it or not. The hardware is advancing rapidly, and someone is going to build the software layer that makes these machines useful in real-world applications, from warehouses and factories to healthcare facilities and homes. If an American company doesn't do it, someone else will. Liffert would argue, and not unreasonably, that it's better for a US firm to control that critical software layer than to cede it entirely.
That's the standard Silicon Valley argument, and there's some merit to it. But it glosses over some serious concerns. First, there's the national security dimension. Humanoid robots equipped with cameras, sensors, and AI-driven decision-making capabilities operating in American cities, hospitals, and infrastructure facilities, that raises questions that go well beyond the commercial opportunity. Who controls the data these robots collect? What are the cybersecurity implications? And who is responsible when something goes wrong?
And then there's the labor dimension, which is frankly the one that should keep most people up at night. These robots are not being developed as curiosities. They are being developed to replace human workers in specific categories of physical labor. When OpenMind makes it easy to deploy Chinese-manufactured humanoid robots globally, they are accelerating a labor displacement timeline that most policymakers and most workers are completely unprepared for.
Liffert's anecdote about the San Francisco park is telling in another way. The police showed up. That's the current state of regulation around humanoid robots in public spaces in the United States. Someone calls the cops because they don't know what else to do. There is no regulatory framework. There are no standards for how these machines should operate in shared public spaces. There is no licensing regime, no insurance requirements, no established liability framework. We are flying blind.
Compare that to China, where, as Liffert himself noted, a humanoid robot walking down the street wouldn't cause the same reaction. That's partly because China has invested heavily in public exposure to this technology, but it's also because China's regulatory approach to emerging technology is fundamentally different. In China, the government actively shapes the deployment environment. In the United States, we tend to let companies deploy first and regulate later, which is exactly what's happening here.
And here's the corporate power angle that we need to highlight. OpenMind is a startup, relatively small right now. But the company is positioning itself at a choke point in what could become one of the most consequential technology supply chains of the next decade. If humanoid robots become as ubiquitous as many predict, the company that controls the software layer, the operating system, essentially, that makes these machines interoperable and deployable, that company will have enormous market power. We've seen this movie before with smartphones. Google's Android became the dominant mobile operating system and gave Google extraordinary influence over the entire mobile ecosystem.
Exactly. And the question that nobody is asking loudly enough is, should a single American startup be the gateway for Chinese humanoid robot technology entering global markets? This isn't a consumer electronics product we're talking about. These are autonomous machines that will operate in physical spaces alongside human beings. The stakes of getting this wrong, in terms of safety, security, employment, and privacy, are qualitatively different from anything we've dealt with before in the technology sector.
What I find most striking about this story is the disconnect between the magnitude of what's happening and the level of public attention it's receiving. There are no congressional hearings about this. There is no serious public debate. A US company is building the on-ramp for Chinese robots to enter the global market, and it barely registers as news. That should concern everyone, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum.
Now let's turn to our third story, and this one hits close to home for millions of Americans. Tesla's sales in California declined 11.4% in 2025. California. The state where Tesla was born, the state that gave electric vehicles their first real market, the state that has been the beating heart of the EV revolution. If Tesla is losing California, that tells you something fundamental has changed.
According to reporting from CleanTechnica, this decline came despite CEO Elon Musk maintaining aggressive sales targets. In the second half of 2024, as it became clear that Tesla was heading for a year-over-year sales decline, Musk kept projecting higher targets than the company could actually hit. He indicated Tesla should see a significant increase in sales in 2025. Instead, the opposite happened, at least in what has historically been the company's most important domestic market.
Let's put that 11.4% in context, Alex. California is not just any state for Tesla. It's the largest car market in the United States. It has the most aggressive EV incentives, the most developed charging infrastructure, and arguably the most EV-friendly consumer base in the country. If Tesla can't grow in California, where can it grow? This isn't a story about a soft quarter in a secondary market. This is a structural alarm bell.
And the reasons behind this decline are important to understand because they tell a story about what happens when a CEO's personal brand becomes inseparable from his company's brand, and then that personal brand becomes deeply polarizing. Elon Musk's political activities in 2024 and 2025, his prominent role in the political sphere, his controversial statements on social media, his leadership of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, these have made him one of the most divisive figures in American public life.
California is a state where the political demographics skew heavily against Musk's political positioning. Surveys have consistently shown that a significant percentage of potential EV buyers in California now associate Tesla with Musk's politics and are actively choosing competitors. BYD, Rivian, Hyundai, Kia, BMW, Mercedes, the EV market is no longer a Tesla monopoly. Consumers have choices, and when the face of your company alienates a substantial portion of your core market, those consumers will exercise those choices.
But here's what makes this more than just a brand perception story. The sales decline is happening at the same time that Tesla's competitive position is eroding on the fundamentals. Chinese manufacturers, particularly BYD, are producing electric vehicles at price points that Tesla cannot match. Tesla's lineup has grown stale. The Model 3 and Model Y, while solid vehicles, are no longer the groundbreaking products they were when they launched. The Cybertruck has been a polarizing product with a limited market. And the promised affordable Tesla model has been perpetually delayed.
And let's talk about what this means for Tesla's valuation, because the stock price has been one of the great speculative stories of the last decade. Tesla has historically traded at a massive premium compared to traditional automakers, a premium justified by the narrative that Tesla was not just a car company but a technology company, an energy company, a robotics company, and an AI company all rolled into one. That narrative depends on growth. When your sales are declining in your most important market, the growth narrative starts to crack.
Musk has tried to shift the narrative toward autonomous driving, toward the Tesla robotaxi, toward Optimus, the company's humanoid robot project. And this actually connects back to our previous story about OpenMind and Chinese humanoid robots. Musk is betting Tesla's future on these adjacent technologies, but the core automotive business is what generates the cash flow that funds everything else. If the car business deteriorates, the whole castle of future promises starts to wobble.
There's also a workforce dimension here that deserves attention. Tesla employs tens of thousands of workers in California, from its Fremont factory to its offices and service centers. A sustained sales decline in the company's home state has implications for those workers, for the communities that depend on Tesla's economic footprint, and for California's broader EV ecosystem. When Tesla sneezes, the entire EV supply chain in California catches a cold.
What's particularly damning is the gap between Musk's projections and reality. When a CEO repeatedly sets sales targets that the company fails to meet, that's not optimism, that's a credibility problem. Investors, analysts, and customers all take note when promises don't match results. And in Tesla's case, the pattern of overpromising and underdelivering, from full self-driving timelines to production targets to the Cybertruck launch, has been building for years. The California sales decline is the latest data point in a trend that the most loyal Tesla supporters are finding increasingly difficult to explain away.
And we should note that this isn't happening in a vacuum. The broader EV market in California continued to grow in 2025. This isn't a case of the entire market contracting and Tesla declining along with it. Other manufacturers gained market share while Tesla lost it. That distinction is critical because it tells you this is a Tesla-specific problem, not an EV market problem. The demand for electric vehicles is healthy. The demand for Tesla specifically is softening, and it's softening most in the places where people know the brand best.
The question I keep coming back to is whether Tesla's board of directors is going to hold Musk accountable for these results. This is a company where the CEO spends a significant portion of his time on non-Tesla activities, from running a government advisory office to managing his social media platform to overseeing SpaceX and half a dozen other ventures. At what point does the board say, "We need your full attention on the business that is losing ground in its most critical market"?
And that question of board accountability loops us right back to our first story about Malaysia's anti-corruption chief. In both cases, you have individuals in positions of extraordinary responsibility whose personal conduct is undermining the institutions they're supposed to serve. Azam Baki's stock ownership allegations erode trust in Malaysia's anti-corruption framework. Musk's political activities and divided attention are eroding Tesla's competitive position. The common thread is a failure of governance, a failure of the systems that are supposed to ensure leaders are held accountable.
Now let's pull all three of these stories together, because the pattern that emerges is one that should concern every one of our viewers. We are living through a moment where the institutions and systems that are supposed to protect the public interest, whether it's anti-corruption enforcement in Malaysia, technology regulation in the United States, or corporate governance at one of the world's most valuable companies, are all failing simultaneously. And they're failing for a connected reason: the concentration of power in individuals and institutions that are not subject to adequate oversight.
In Malaysia, the anti-corruption chief accumulated stock holdings that are now under investigation. How did that happen without earlier detection? Where were the disclosure requirements, the compliance checks, the internal controls? The system failed because it was built on the assumption that the person at the top would police themselves, and that assumption proved naive.
With OpenMind and Chinese humanoid robots, we have a startup making decisions with enormous national security and economic implications, and there is no regulatory framework to evaluate or constrain those decisions. The system failed because it doesn't exist yet. We're operating in a governance vacuum on one of the most consequential technology developments of the decade.
And with Tesla, we have a CEO whose personal political activities are measurably damaging shareholder value, and a board that appears either unable or unwilling to intervene. The system failed because corporate governance structures at Tesla have historically been weak, and the cult of personality around Musk has made it politically impossible for board members to challenge him.
3 stories, 3 continents, 1 pattern. The people and institutions we rely on to maintain accountability and protect the public interest are either compromised, absent, or captured. And in every case, it's ordinary people who pay the price. Malaysian citizens who can't trust their anti-corruption system. American workers who may be displaced by robots deployed without adequate oversight. Tesla shareholders and employees watching value erode while the CEO focuses elsewhere.
What's maddening is that none of this is inevitable. Every one of these failures is a choice. Malaysia could have had robust financial disclosure requirements for senior government officials that would have flagged Azam Baki's stock holdings years ago. The United States could have developed a regulatory framework for humanoid robotics before companies started deploying them in public parks. Tesla's board could have demanded that its CEO either focus on the company or step aside. These were all choices, and in every case, the people with the power to make the right choice either didn't or wouldn't.
And that brings us to the question we always come back to on this show: what can you do about it? Because knowledge without action is just frustration. If you're an investor, ask tough questions about governance. If you're a voter, demand that your representatives address the regulatory gaps around emerging technologies. If you're a consumer, understand that your purchasing decisions send signals that corporations actually listen to. The 11% decline in Tesla's California sales didn't come from regulators or legislators. It came from consumers making individual choices that added up to a message the company can't ignore.
And if you're a citizen of Malaysia, or any country struggling with corruption, support the civil society organizations and journalists who are doing the hard work of holding powerful people accountable. The reason Azam Baki is sitting before a special committee is not because the system worked automatically. It's because people demanded accountability. That's how change happens. Not from the top down, but from the bottom up, one demand at a time.
Before we go, I want to highlight one more connection that struck me as we put tonight's broadcast together. OpenMind is a software company building bridges between Chinese hardware and global markets. Tesla is a hardware company whose CEO has been promising software breakthroughs in autonomy and AI for years. And Malaysia's corruption probe is fundamentally about financial instruments, stocks, which are themselves a kind of technology for allocating capital and ownership. In all three cases, the technology itself is neutral. What matters is who controls it, who benefits from it, and who is held responsible when it's misused.
That's exactly right. A humanoid robot is just a machine. A stock certificate is just a piece of paper. An electric vehicle is just a car. But the systems of power, governance, and accountability that surround these technologies, those determine whether they serve the public or serve the powerful. Right now, in all three of tonight's stories, the systems are tilted toward the powerful. Our job, as journalists and as citizens, is to tilt them back.
That's going to do it for tonight's Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth. Remember, the truth doesn't care about your comfort zone, and neither do we. We'll keep digging, we'll keep asking, and we'll keep reporting what we find, because that's what journalism is supposed to do.
And I'm Maya Clarity. If tonight's stories made you think, made you question, or made you angry, good. That means you're paying attention. Share this broadcast, talk about these issues, and hold the powerful accountable in whatever way you can. We'll see you next time on Truth Report. Stay informed, stay engaged, and above all, stay truthful.